Anna found herself caught in a complicated situation with a mysterious figure, his words echoing in her mind as his expression shifted unpredictably. At times, he seemed like a beast determined to seize what he desired, and other times, he appeared almost helpless. Despite the unsettling feelings, she couldn't shake the thought that she had unwittingly become entangled with the male lead of this strange story. Confused and disoriented, Liana realized she had somehow ended up inside the very novel she had once read. She had transmigrated into the body of an unknown extra, finding herself in an unfamiliar prison cell. She couldn't understand how or why this had happened. Most people who transmigrated into novels seemed to wake up in luxurious settings, but Liana found herself in a dark and cold prison. She felt frustrated by her terrible luck, knowing that her new life would revolve around an abusive, R-rated romance story. The story of the novel began with Francia, the female lead, who came to the prison in place of her father. Naturally curious and innocent, she stumbled upon an imprisoned man, locked deep in the basement. That man was Lorin von Hernem, the male lead. His family had inherited a powerful curse, and anyone who couldn't suppress it was imprisoned, as the curse turned them into violent beasts with supernatural strength. Francia, out of kindness, freed him, unaware of the consequences. As soon as Lorin was released, he transformed into a beast, and the story turned dark and explicit, starting a complicated love triangle. The villain, who was also a potential love interest, was obsessively attached to Francia. As Liana pieced the story together, she realized she had been thrust into a tense and toxic world where enemies from powerful families clashed and the love triangle endured even in high society. The prison, known as Cambarcum, was a grim and oppressive place, especially for Lorin, whose personality seemed to darken due to his harsh confinement. The atmosphere made it hard to imagine anyone remaining sane. Despite the gloomy surroundings, Liana found some comfort in small distractions, like her surprising skill at card games, much to the chagrin of the prison guard, Hans. The central prison housed many imprisoned nobles, and the guards were knights who watched over them. Liana, however, was able to bribe some of them to look the other way as she snooped around. With a little persuasion, she managed to get a brief chance to see Lorin's cell. She was amazed at how little care was given to the prison, which was in dire condition. When she finally laid eyes on the male lead, she couldn't help but be struck by his stunning appearance. His beauty was undeniable, but then she heard something utterly strange. He barked like a dog. The situation was even more bizarre than she had imagined. Lana stared in disbelief as the man before her, once calm, suddenly began to bark. Woof, woof. She couldn't help but wonder if the rumors were true. Did the curse that turned him into a beast mean he was really acting like a dog? His condition appeared far from normal, with a magical seal on his neck. It was like something out of the novel she had read, but seeing it firsthand was much more unsettling. The idea that he was restrained by magic, rather than traditional chains, took her by surprise. She barely avoided being bitten, unable to comprehend why the male lead, this man, was acting like a wild animal. Was it because she had reached out toward his restraints? He barked again, his growls growing louder. She needed to calm him down somehow. Looking around, she tried to find something to divert his attention. She offered him a small object, hoping to distract him, but it only seemed to provoke him more when he bit it. Disgusted, she tried to take it back from him, but to her shock, he understood her. Then, to her horror, he bit her. "Wait, did you just bite me?" she gasped, wincing from the pain. It was clear that something was wrong with him, and the situation escalated quickly. As she tried to soothe him, he suddenly stopped, his voice softer now. "You're the first to be bitten by me," he muttered, a bit dazed. Lana, still in shock, struggled to make sense of what had just happened. Was he coming back to his senses? "Have you calmed down?" she asked carefully. He nodded, though it was clear he was still embarrassed. When he explained that this had been his first time biting someone, Lana couldn't help but feel a bit awkward. "You know," she said, "when you keep saying my first time, someone might misunderstand. He panicked at her words. No, it's not. But then he stopped himself. It seemed he had regained some control over his emotions. As the conversation shifted, Lana apologized for her sudden actions and reassured him. What matters isn't your first time, she said. What's important is that you'll keep receiving kindness in the future. Someone kind will come along, and they'll show you compassion. For a moment, it seemed like the conversation had calmed things down between them. She turned to leave, glancing back at him as the faint light from her candle flickered. I'll be back, she said, though she couldn't shake the feeling of curiosity about his true expression. But her departure was interrupted. The warden arrived in a panic. There's been an intruder in the basement prison. The urgency in his voice was unmistakable. The basement was supposed to be a secure, high-risk area. So how had someone gotten in? Lana's heart raced. Were the guards being careless? The warden ordered someone to investigate the breach immediately. The warden ordered an immediate investigation into the intruder's identity. Meanwhile, Lana wandered through the prison, growing increasingly fascinated by the strange environment. Though it was a prison, there seemed to be privileges reserved for the nobles. Extravagant meals, desserts, and recreational activities were part of their lifestyle, which contrasted sharply with the prison uniforms everyone wore. It was a bizarre scene. As she explored, she caught a whiff of a new fragrance, prompting a conversation with a nearby prisoner. They discussed how it was the first of its kind, and Lana couldn't help but think back to Dorian's earlier words. He had mentioned she was his first, and she wondered if this was leading to some kind of romance. But she quickly dismissed the idea, knowing it couldn't happen in the context of the novel's plot. Dorian was trapped by a magical restraining seal, and only the female lead of the original novel could release it. This fated person was meant to be the one who could free him after 4 years. Lana, however, had no idea when or why she had been imprisoned. She had no memory of her conviction. When a fellow prisoner, Baron Pilates, noticed her sighing, he asked if she was thinking about her release. Lana felt uneasy at the mention of being a convict. Don't say release, she replied. It makes me feel like I'm a real convict. The Baron, who had been charged with fraud, sat next to her and suggested they talk. He offered a humorous perspective, even pointing out a mirror and claiming that just looking at her reflection would be fun. Lana didn't find it amusing. They shifted the conversation to more serious topics, like the Dormulet Duchy, one of the 3 dukedoms of the Empire. It was the house of the villain in the original novel, and Lana knew that understanding the plot of the novel could help her figure out how to live comfortably once she was released. She learned from the Baron that rumors about Dormulet's actions had been circulating, particularly regarding a tiara that had been purchased at an underground auction. This tiara, it turned out, had belonged to the Empress and was mentioned in the original story, where the female lead found it at the villain's mansion. The Imperial family had searched the Dormulet mansion for the missing tiara, but had found no trace of it. The rumors, however, didn't stop there. The Duke of Dormulet, Chaser Louv Dormulet, was infamous for his villainy in the novel. Further whispers spoke of his true treasure, a son and a daughter. Lana was intrigued, though she knew the villain's tragic past would be revealed soon in the original story. With the plot unfolding as it did in the novel, Lana was left wondering about her own story. She admitted to the Baron that she had enjoyed the adventure she mentioned earlier, but there had been one problem. There hadn't been a single window in her cell. She then asked him if he knew how she could meet the warden. However, before he could respond, a loud growl interrupted them. It was Dorian, who had suddenly reverted to his more beastly state. Lana, though used to his mood swings, couldn't help but feel a bit awkward. No matter how much bribery she offered, she knew she couldn't visit the underground prison every day. It had taken her 3 days to get back to see Dorian, but as she stood in front of the cell, she could tell it wasn't simply a matter of switching a lever. The situation was much more complex than that. Lana continued her conversation with Dorian, trying to make sense of his behavior. He seemed to understand her words perfectly, but he wasn't speaking like a normal person. She was frustrated, but still tried to offer him some bread she had sneakily brought from the kitchen. Though he seemed to understand her well, he made dog-like noises instead of responding verbally, which left her confused. "Do you like bread?" she asked, trying to keep things light. She noticed how aggressively he ate and warned him, "Eat slowly or you might choke." She had a feeling something like this would happen, and sure enough, he nearly choked on the bread. "See? I told you," she said, scolding him. "Don't bite me. If you do, I'm going to scold you. Do you understand?" Dorian's behavior shifted again, and he seemed to be back to his more hostile state. Lana, however, was unfazed. "You were eating so nicely just now, using my hand," she remarked with a smirk. But then she sighed and muttered, "Take responsibility or don't touch me. Someone else will take care of that." She knew she was only joking, but she couldn't help herself. Lana shifted the topic, speaking about the heroine, or the female lead from the novel. "The heroine is beautiful, kind, and has special abilities. She can free you from your shackles." "Perfect, right?" she said with a hint of sarcasm. "That's why I came to see you so confidently. But it's too dark here." She explained how life for the central prisoner was one of luxury, delicious meals, tea times, and even walks. But that was far from the case for Dorian. His prison life was designed as nothing but hardship, reflecting the tough journey of the main character in the novel. It was clear that this wasn't the life he wanted. Lana pointed out the darkness surrounding them, with no sunlight and the musty smell of moss in the air. The prisoners were allowed one walk a day, but the area was just withered grass and dried flowers. "What I'm trying to say is, don't you want to take a walk?" she asked. Dorian seemed confused. "What is a walk? Is that where you got stuck?" he asked. Mana tried to explain, saying, "Going outside. I can't go outside. But what if you can? Would you?" She knew he wanted to go outside, but his silence spoke volumes. "I know you want to go out," she said, reading him well. However, her hopes were dashed when she realized that the warden's approval was needed for any walks. She'd heard that even if someone requested a meeting, it wasn't easy to get the warden's attention. Lana, unsure if she'd even get the chance to meet with the warden, still managed to sneak into the underground prison. She had requested a meeting under the name Inanna and nervously hoped everything would go well. To her surprise, the response was swift. "Miss Ivana, please come in," the voice from behind the door said. It seemed easier than she had expected. As Ivana entered the room, she noticed that it seemed empty. The place was quiet, with no one in sight. She wondered if the staff had stepped out for a moment. The structure of the prison was a complicated hierarchy, with guards at the bottom, consisting mostly of junior and mid-level knights. Above them were the chiefs of guards, and higher still were the administrators. At the very top was the chief warden of Cambercam. The chief warden was a significant character in the novel, often depicted as the right-hand man to the main villain, Chaser. He had committed many heinous acts, working closely with Chaser. His reasons were eventually revealed in a side story, showing that he had an unrequited love for Chaser's nameless younger sister. Despite being a villain, he was surprisingly popular due to his romantic nature. Ivana was about to meet the warden when she was interrupted by someone else. A man entered the room, and Ivana was immediately aware that he wasn't who she had expected. This man was Renéage Voltiais, a marquis and supporting character in the novel. He was the chief warden of Cambercam. "You're looking for me?" he asked. Ivana, trying to remain composed, avoided showing any sign of recognition. She nodded and spoke. "I have a request," she said, trying to keep the conversation formal. Renéage, curious, asked what the request was. Ivana asked if the rumors about the fair treatment of prisoners were true. Renéage responded honestly, confirming that on the surface, the prisoners were treated fairly, but he implied that there was more to the story than he let on. Ivana pressed further, asking about the rules for prisoners. According to the regulations, unless they were major offenders, all prisoners were allowed to take walks or engage in hobbies. Renéage acknowledged this, but Ivana went on to bring up a prisoner locked away in a solitary, windowless cell in the underground section of the central wing. She learned that this prisoner wasn't a major offender, yet he had been denied the chance to walk or enjoy any form of recreation. "Do you feel sorry for him?" Ivana asked, testing Renéage's response. Renéage gave her a strange look, and Ivana quickly clarified, saying that she was asking out of compassion as she couldn't ignore the plight of someone in such a situation. When Reneage asked if she was suggesting this because she pitied the prisoner, Ivana explained that every time she thought of him, she couldn't help but think of her younger brother, which was why she couldn't just pass by and pretend not to see him. However, Ivana wasn't entirely sure if she even had a younger brother, as nobles often referred to distant relatives as close family, so Reneage would likely never know the truth. Currently, Rick Dorian, the prisoner in question, wasn't a significant threat, though in the original story, his relationship with Reneage had soured after Chaser's arrival. Ivana continued to press for her request, asking that the prisoner be allowed to take a walk. She expected Reneage to refuse, but much to her surprise, he agreed without hesitation. "I will grant your request," Reneage said. Ivana was shocked by how easily he had agreed. Ivana had been prepared to offer a suitable alternative in case Reneage refused her request. But instead of hesitation, Reneage agreed immediately, which caught her off guard. He explained that he had already made a promise to her older brother and father that he would grant any requests she made. Ivana was stunned. She had no idea what kind of relationship her family had with Reneage. Why would her father and older brother have made such a promise to him? Could it be that Ivana came from an influential family, and her standing played a role in Reneage's decision? Reneage then added that because the prisoner Ivana mentioned was convicted of a magic-related crime, mid-level knights would need to accompany him during his walks. He assured her that he would not be negligent, especially since her brother had asked for this favor. Ivana couldn't help but wonder what kind of deal her faceless brother had struck with Reneage to gain such influence. As Reneage escorted her out, he mentioned that, even without the promise, he still would have granted her request without hesitation. Ivana was left confused by his words, wondering if there was a deeper meaning behind them. The next day, despite being granted the rare privilege of a walk for the prisoner, heavy rain started pouring, rendering her efforts futile. Her plan of pretending to be a kind-hearted lady was disrupted by Reneage, who had already known more about her than she expected. Still, the result was beneficial in the end. As Ivana prepared for the day ahead, a fellow guard warned her to be careful because the prisoner was screaming. Ivana was puzzled and asked, "Screaming?" She thanked the guard for the warning, but when she entered, she noticed something strange. The usual barking from the prisoner was louder and more frantic than before, almost as if he were frightened. The atmosphere was damp, and the smell of the underground prison only added to the unease. Riche Doran had always been treated cruelly by his family, particularly by the Grand Duke. His inability to control his immense power led to him being abandoned and isolated, which left him with a deep fear of water. His family's harsh treatment continued until a blast companion arrived in his life. Over time, it became clear that Rakitaran's power was immense, but difficult to control. One day, Ivana, who had taken an interest in him, tried to comfort him by bringing a bell. She asked if he liked the sound, thinking it might be more pleasant than the rain. She also brought other items, hoping to soothe him, and noticed that he seemed to appreciate them. As she wiped him down, Ivana questioned whether animals could catch cold, noting his discomfort. She also saw a rose, remembering that Riche Doran would need to see his companion until the petals fell. Feeling awkward, she wondered if she had overstepped. Riche Doran seemed to get closer, and Ivana found herself flustered, unsure of what to make of his actions. Despite her initial hesitation, she realized she wasn't as scared as she thought she would be. Still, she questioned the strange behavior of this male protagonist, wondering about his intentions. A few days later, the continuous rain caused Ivana to stop visiting Riche Doran, partly because she hadn't been able to maintain a safe distance from him. But the main reason for her decision was the lack of any letters from her brother. Since arriving in this world, Ivana had regularly received letters with empty paper, where she wrote whatever came to mind. She learned later that these letters came from Lana's brother. However, it had been 12 days since she received any, and she began to wonder if she had become a nuisance to him or if something had happened to him. In the meantime, Ivana was approached by a man who noticed her distraction and asked if something was bothering her. She dismissed it, saying it was nothing special. Then, the conversation shifted to Countess Andrea, the woman who had recently fainted from hysteria. Ivana learned that she had woken up 4 days later, still suffering from the same hysteria. It turned out the situation was far more complicated than it seemed. The once decent Andrea family had been completely ruined, leaving everyone shocked. People were particularly surprised that such a prominent family had fallen overnight. The culprit behind their downfall was revealed to be the Black Rose, the future Duke of Domulet, known as Chaser Love Dormulet. He had launched a major attack, using an extremely powerful weapon. The real issue, however, was that Count Andrea had been a close ally of Archduke Hernim, and the two families were sworn enemies. The long-standing animosity between the Red Rose family, headed by Archduke Hernim, and the Black Rose family, led by Dormulet, had only grown over time. In the midst of all this, the heroine found herself caught in a love triangle, with the hatred between the two families reaching a peak. In a tragic turn, Chaser had killed Rakitern's father, along with his henchmen and friends, intensifying the conflict between the families. Ironically, Lorin, despite the abuse he suffered at the hands of his father, still harbored affection for him. This, in turn, fueled his deep hatred for Chaser, whom he despised to the point of wishing for his death. It seemed that the story was heading toward a disastrous conclusion for their relationships. Chaser loved Dormulet, although a cunning young man, had clearly made a fatal mistake this time. Archduke Hernim, who had yet to address the situation, had sent his knights to gather evidence, signaling that things were about to get much worse. However, what was even more unsettling was that Chaser himself had disappeared. As the villain, he was clearly plotting something from a hidden location, likely preparing for an even greater scheme. In the midst of all this turmoil, Ivana found herself worrying about something else entirely. She hadn't received any letters from her brother, who had always been diligent in sending them. She was concerned that something urgent had happened, and her fears deepened as the days passed without word. One day, while reflecting on this, she was reassured by a friend who told her not to worry too much, suggesting that something important must have come up. Ivana, still anxious, questioned whether she would be abandoned once she was released from prison. Despite her concerns, she found herself missing Lana, her brother, deeply. Lana was shocked when she heard the news. There had been a breakthrough in the case of the ruined Andrea family. The culprit responsible was identified, and it was none other than Chaser Love Dormulet. On top of that, Duke Hernim had been gravely injured. Some even speculated that Chaser had either been directly involved or had coordinated with the real culprit. Lana recalled the moment when Chaser killed Rakitern's father. He had been severely beaten before he died in agony. That must have been the event everyone was referring to. She decided to return home early that day, relieved that it was Chaser Dormulet who was at the center of the chaos. The reason for her relief was that many of Chaser's followers were in the prison, and if Chaser committed any crimes or caused trouble, they could stir up a storm of terror. She definitely didn't want that to happen. It seemed Chaser, the resourceful villain, had returned after going missing for a while. Lana admitted to having mixed feelings about him. She was curious to meet him, but at the same time, she didn't really want to. The world was full of surprises, and that was what made life interesting. As she was about to leave, someone mentioned that she hadn't received a letter in a while. To her surprise, when she opened the letter, it wasn't blank as usual. Instead, it contained a message. "Hello, Lana. How are you doing, my beloved little sister?" Lana was taken aback by the handwriting and the brief, but personal note. The letter continued with a more playful tone. "Send alcohol, expensive cigars, and luxury items. That should be enough, right? I'm quite proud of myself." Lana couldn't help but chuckle at her brother's odd request, and after reading it, she felt both amused and bewildered. Meanwhile, the rain had stopped, and she reflected on her situation. Just as she was trying to make sense of things, she received word that the chief warden was looking for her. She was summoned to a meeting. When she arrived, the warden handed her a gift from her older brother. It was a pair of earrings, a personal item sent with instructions. No one in the prison would call her by her last name, as per her brother's request. Lana was taken aback, realizing why everyone had been addressing her by her first name. She now understood that her brother had made arrangements for her, and it made her reflect on how much he cared for her well-being. Lana thanked the warden for taking care of her, expressing her belief that her father and brother would also be grateful for the kindness she had received. The warden, however, seemed skeptical. He questioned whether her family truly felt that way before complimenting Lana for being kind, in contrast to her relatives. Lana, confused by his comment, defended her family, insisting that they were good people. The warden then suggested they at least smile, especially since the rain had stopped. He mentioned that the young prisoner she had spoken about would soon be allowed a walk, but with multiple guards accompanying him for safety. Lana agreed that it was fine, though she was surprised by how the prisoner could still smile despite his situation. The next day, as Lana reflected on how nice the weather was, she couldn't help but marvel at how different the prisoner seemed. She thought back to the original novel, where he had been a tough character, but now he was so sweet in front of the woman he loved. Sally, another prison inmate, commented on how sunny the day was, warning that it could lead to sunburn, though she still looked pretty even when burned. Lana noticed that a group of elite guards was accompanying the prisoner, which puzzled her, as she had heard they usually only cared for the most dangerous criminals. She decided to inquire further and approached the guards. When she spoke with Renard, one of the guards, she learned that the prisoner was not going for a walk, but was being taken for custody. Lana became worried, realizing that the prisoner might suffocate under such conditions. To her surprise, the prisoner seemed to be ignoring her, and when she went to find him, she saw he had escaped. Frustrated, Lana asked the prisoner why he had run away. He blushed and acted flustered, teasing her that she would soon make him blush even more. Lana, relieved to see he was unharmed, reassured him that if he didn't want to explain, it was okay. But the prisoner quickly insisted that it wasn't the case, and with some hesitation, he asked why she hadn't come to see him sooner. Lana waited anxiously, but the prisoner never showed up. She asked why he hadn't come, and the prisoner explained that bribes were required to enter. Without alcohol or cigars, he couldn't provide the service. Lana then wondered if this was the last time she would see him. The prisoner trembled, possibly due to the way others had abandoned him in the past, and it struck Lana's heart. They briefly discussed the walk that had been requested. The prisoner mentioned that he had asked for it and questioned if Lana had been thankful. He then suggested they go on another walk together, asking what she would call him. Playfully, he told her to call him Master since they would be walking together, but quickly added that he was teasing. He reminded her not to ignore him next time. Later, the warden arrived and commented on Lana's concern for such a dangerous criminal. He asked if she was uncomfortable, to which Lana quickly denied. She learned that the prison guards believed Rakitran's crime was related to the misuse of magic, and only Renard knew his true identity. Lana noticed a strange rope on the prisoner's wrist, and Renard explained that it was a special rope used for criminals with magic. If the prisoner had a seizure or his mana surged uncontrollably, the rope would tighten to subdue him. However, the situation quickly escalated when Rishtoran started having a seizure. The guards scrambled to control him, but the magic rope failed to activate. Panic spread as the prisoner's condition worsened. Just when things seemed out of control, the prisoner's strength became evident, shocking Lana. She hadn't realized how strong he truly was. As the restraints finally worked again, the guards urgently requested Lana to speak a command to help, but she hesitated, unsure. In the heat of the moment, she finally shouted a command to stop him, not knowing exactly what would happen next. Lana was left in disbelief as the situation unfolded. The male lead, once a prisoner, was now acting in a strange and animalistic way, even walking on all fours. She questioned what was happening, wondering if she had accidentally trained him like a dog. Renard, the prison guard, asked if she was a wizard, but Lana dismissed the idea. She noted how fortunate it was that there was no one around to witness the bizarre spectacle. After some time, Lana and Renard discussed the strange events. The magical restraint that was supposed to control the prisoner's seizures failed to work, which had never happened before. They were puzzled by the lack of response, especially when commands like "stop" were shouted. Juana felt an unusual sense of weakness, but Renard reassured her. They decided to send the prisoner back to his room while they figured out the situation. Lana agreed to help with the task. Meanwhile, the prisoner, Doran, apologized to Lana for the difficult situation he had caused during their walk. He acknowledged that being tied up wasn't pleasant, but he hoped she had still enjoyed the experience. Lana reassured him, telling him she had liked the walk and didn't mind the circumstances. Doran admitted that he remembered most of the events that happened while he was under the animal-like state, but couldn't recall everything. Juana found it intriguing that he could remember so much, considering it was such a dark past. Before parting ways, Doran asked if they would go for another walk in the future, to which Lana replied cautiously. She told him to smile next time they met. Doran, still unsure about being touched, hesitated but said it was fine for now. Elsewhere, in the Renard estate office, news reached the higher-ups that the prisoner had harmed Lana. However, according to the report, it seemed that Lana was more exhausted than injured. They called for an immediate explanation. Lana was summoned to explain the situation, and it was clear that things were escalating. Lord Chaser had arrived and would be heading to the prison in a few days, giving orders to send medicine to Lana and organize her schedule. Despite the recent commotion, the walks with the prisoner were still expected to continue until the chief warden returned. Lana, who had been worried that the walks might be cancelled after the incident, was relieved to hear they would proceed. There were ongoing discussions about treating Doran like an animal, but Lana had offered her help, and the situation seemed to be under control. She wondered when Renard would return, and in the meantime, Doran thanked her for her assistance and mentioned that the chief warden would stop by later that day. The next day, Lana found herself in an awkward situation with Doran. He woke up early and tried to sit on the cold floor, but she quickly apologized for not offering him a proper seat. The tension was palpable, and as the conversation continued, it became clear that Renard was impressed by how Lana had handled the prisoner, treating him like a dog. However, Lana was concerned that her brother might misunderstand the situation, especially after reading the letter requesting alcohol and cigarettes. She didn't know much about her brother or father, and would only learn more once she left the estate. Despite the awkwardness, Renard continued to insist that the walks for the underground prisoner would continue, aligning with Lana's wishes. As their conversation shifted, Lana learned that Rakitaran's family, the Hernam family, was aligned with the Duke faction, while Renard's family, the Dormulet faction, supported the villain, Chaser Dormulet. This revelation raised doubts in Lana's mind about Renard's true loyalties, especially since he was maintaining a neutral appearance. The conversation veered into the politics of the Empire, where the noble factions were divided, and Lana's family was associated with the Dormulet faction. Renard, however, seemed to have deeper ties with them than initially apparent. In the midst of this, Lana was left with a question. What did it all mean for her and her relationship with the prisoner, Doran? She still couldn't quite figure it out, especially when Renard hinted at spending more time with her, just the two of them. Lana was told to make herself comfortable, but her safety was the most important priority. She was reminded that, as long as she kept that in mind, she could do anything she wanted in the future. However, the situation with Doran and Chaser's involvement in the prison was unsettling. Lana realized that her family was likely aligned with the villain side, which explained why Renard treated her so well, despite his stern demeanor. There was a growing concern that villains always end up losing, and preparations for the future were needed. As it started to rain, Lana found that the planned walk was no longer possible. She noticed that Doran seemed to be shaking, possibly because of the rain. Unsure of what was going on, she decided to check on him. When she arrived, there was already someone there before her, which made her uneasy. She briefly considered leaving but decided to stay, keeping her visit a secret. Upon entering, she noticed a strange, pungent smell from inside. It was Rakitaran's scent, a reminder of the abuse he suffered from his father. Lana realized that his father had left marks on him, and she couldn't leave him without help. Despite not having any medicine on hand, she decided to send a letter to her brother, hoping for a response. A few days later, the medicine arrived, and Lana took it to Lorin. She was still uncertain why she was helping him so much, but it felt like something she had to do. While tending to Rakitran's wounds, she noticed more of his injuries, including wounds on his eyes. She promised to clean them and applied the medicine, even if it caused him discomfort. During the process, Lorin smiled and Lana, flustered, tried to downplay the compliment. Lorin then joked about how she was prettier than him, but Lana quickly brushed it off. She continued her work, applying the remaining medicine to his neck and shoulders. When Lana noticed that the medicine included burn ointment, she wondered why her brother had sent it without asking where she had been hurt. His thoughtfulness increased her affection for him. As she finished applying the medicine, she asked Lorin to stop breathing so heavily, unsure if it was okay for her to touch him in certain places. The situation left her with a mix of emotions, but she continued to care for him, despite the strange dynamics unfolding.